So, because Vladimir Putin is not just a bad guy, he's a very, very intelligent, clever bad guy. One of the things I have noticed is that every time I look at an article about what he's up to, it says something different. So I wanted to talk to Rebekah Koffler today. She's a Russian-born former DIA intelligence officer, that's defense intelligence, and author of Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America, which is basically kind of unfolding in front of our eyes. She's now a strategic intelligence analyst with the Lindsay Group. Rebekah, thank you so much for coming on.
Of course. It's my honor and pleasure, Andrew, to be with you and your audience here.
Oh, thank you. It's, let's just start with you for a minute. You're actually from the Soviet Union, right? You were born in the Soviet Union?
I was born and raised in the former Soviet Union, went to school there, immigrated back in 1989, served in the intelligence community, and yeah, I've written a book, and unfortunately, right now, the events are unfolding exactly according to Putin's playbook, about which I was trying to warn back in the intelligence community and by writing this book.
Yeah, it is kind of amazing. Before we get to Putin, though, is there something that you could tell America, if there was one thing you could get Americans to understand about the Russian people, what is it that we don't get about them?
Well, the one thing is Russians don't think like Americans, and in fact, no one thinks like Americans, even Europeans don't think like Americans. Americans are unique people, shaped and formed by their history. And so are the Russians. The Russians also believe that they're exceptional. And so I described it, in my book. And obviously, America is all about freedom, justice, and opportunity. But the Russians, there's a reason why they support Putin, and we can go into it. It's not that they are bad people. Of course, there are bad people in Russia, and the government is very corrupt. But overall, there are two, as the Russians like to say, there are two big differences, between Russians and Americans.
And those are, but why do they support Putin, though? I mean, the guy seems like an absolute gangster to me. Why do they like him?
Right. So you nailed it. Yes, he's a gangster. But basically, during the collapse and in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia went through some very, very tough times, and especially the Russian people did, because the communists became capitalists, right? Because they were in a position to grab all the, factories and plants, all the businesses. Because remember, under the Soviet rule, there was no private property. Everything belonged to the government, right? Well, the same people became capitalists. The Russian people got the short end of the stick. And while everybody in the West was celebrating the so-called peace dividend and was expecting that all of a sudden Russia was going to become a democracy, nothing like that really happened. So the Russians associate democracy with very bad, difficult times, tumultuous times. They even call it the damn 90s. Mm-hmm. And Putin turned up and he completely changed everything, and he put law and order, if you will, and he raised Russia's stature on world stage, and the great power status is part of Russian identity, and that's why they love him. Not everybody, and yes, his approval rating fluctuates, but it's still very high. Like it usually is between 60 and 80, and even during the downtime, 60 is still very well, above what our U.S. presidents get.
So there are people on the right in this country who kind of like Putin too, because talks about law and order, he talks about religion. What is Putin up to? I mean, you wrote a book called Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. Rebekah Koffler. What is his playbook? What's he up to?
Right. Well, first, Andrew, if I may, I want to address very briefly the religious aspect of it.
Yeah, please.
Putin tries to present himself as this religious, man, right? And he resurrected the spirituality in Russia, and he's raising the stature of Russian Orthodox Church, trying to really pretend that that the Russians are very similar to American religious people, and nothing can be further from the truth, right? There's big differences, and we can go into that later. And so when former President Bush looked into Putin's eyes and saw a soul, he was mistaken. President Bush was sort of a victim, if you will, of Putin's manipulations, because the Russians profile U.S. leaders routinely, right, with whom they deal, and including President Biden, which is why you see, Putin being able to outmaneuver President Biden. So back then, he knew that President Bush is very religious, and he was trying to establish some, common interest with him. So that's one thing. And then with regard to Putin's playbook, which I wrote, the Russians developed a very unique and very sophisticated strategy to prevent the United States from letting Putin achieve his strategic ambitions, which is rebuild the imperial Russia. And again, we could get into that later. And if we stand in their way, which Putin understands we do, because our national interests are on the collision course, he's even prepared to defeat the United States, including militarily. And there are a lot of non-kinetic aspects in his playbook, and one of them is cyber, which is why you see the DHS recently announcing that the Russian cyber attack is in the works, and somehow we should be bracing for it. Somehow we're supposed now to defend ourselves, from the Russian cyber attack, even though we have a very strong national security apparatus. But unfortunately, they were sleeping at the wheel while Putin was developing his strategy, and we were not paying attention, and we were not developing counter strategy.
When you say he wants to rebuild imperial Russia, you're talking about Russia even before the Soviet Union, right?
So, well, I kind of, I'm sorry, Andrew, I used this word colloquially.
Okay.
Let me just be very nuanced about this. So what Putin wants is to reconstitute a supranational state, not unlike the former Soviet Union, right? He wants to integrate the post-Soviet states into one entity that would be sort of similar to a combination of three things: NATO, European Union, and Soviet Union, right? The nuance here is that there's no plan, right, at least right now, to incorporate Baltics into that supranational state, because Putin understands the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia are part of NATO. And if one thing that Putin is afraid of is the might of US and NATO military capability, kinetic capability. So he doesn't want to escalate the conflict where he would have to take us on head on, right? But everything else, post-Soviet states, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Moldova, all of those, he wants to integrate them, and the process is already underway. He has established the Eurasian Union. He calls it the Eurasian European Union, but colloquially, they even referring to it right now as the Union. And Belarus and Russia are right now like this,
so,
and CSTO is part of that, which is equivalent in Putin's view to NATO, which is what he used in Kazakhstan.
So in your estimation, is he going to actually send troops into Ukraine? Is that where you think this is headed?
So, okay. So that's a very, it's a tough one, right? Several weeks ago, I made a call and I put out an op-ed, which was published on Fox News website. It's titled something like, Putin is going to strike Ukraine soon, and he's just toying with Biden, right? At that point, I assessed that was what Putin was going to do. I still did not rule out the possibility that Putin will attack Ukraine, right? Including with a kinetic strike, including take over possibly eastern Ukraine, because that has been his plan all along for possibly ever since he became Russian president, right? He talked about it. He has written about it, that Ukraine and Russia are one people. So an alternative to an actual invasion would be an installment of Putin's puppet, a pro-Russian government leader, and removing Zelensky through a coup, not unlike, what happened back in 2014. The regime change that the Russians still can't get over, and they attribute that occurrence to the United States. And they are super paranoid. Putin is super paranoid of the United States possibly preparing a coup against Putin. And so that's his playbook.
How does cyber figure into this? What would a Russian cyber attack on America look like?
That's an excellent question, and it's a very, very scary one, Andrew. Cyber is actually features very prominently in Russian doctrine and strategy. In fact, I have a whole chapter in my book called Cyber Weapons, targeting U.S. networks and American minds, right? Cyber, the way that the Russians view cyber is very different from our conception of cyber. The U.S. are what we call blue, right? They view, they call it cyber weapons, and they view a technical aspect of it as a very prominent one, but even more prominent one, the information aspect of it. What do they mean by that? What they did back in 2016, the intervention in US election, not for the reasons that the media present and not to elect Trump, anything like that, but it was basically to create chaos and disorder and possibly foment an unrest, right?
So they succeeded. That succeeded utterly, right?
That is exactly right. And alarmingly, Andrew, our own intelligence community, the corrupt echelons of the IC, which I honorably served, but there were corrupt people like John Brennan, James Clapper, James Comey, the FBI director. So they put out that fraudulent ICA, right? The Intelligence Community Assessment, our flagship product, which was completely, mischaracterized Putin's intention. Okay. So getting back to cyber, which is the question that you asked. So the cyber attacks that Russia is prepared to wage could be of two kinds. There could be a worst case scenario, right? And that would only be attempted by Putin if Putin assesses that the US is actually intervening militarily in war on Ukraine's behalf. He has the capability to plunge our country into darkness by attacking our power grid, right? Wow. And if I may, I'm going to read to you an actual quote that comes from one of Putin's key cyber warfare strategists. The reason I want to read to you Andrew, is because A, it's very demonstrative, and B, is because the US government was trying to sabotage the publication of my book because they didn't want.
Rebekah, please read just a short bit of it because I have an important question and I'm running out of time, but I just read a short.
Got it. Okay, sure. By inserting disinformation in publications advocating extremist ideas, inciting racist and xenophobic flash mobs, conducting interstate computer attacks on the critical infrastructure targets that are vital for the functioning of a society, it is possible to heat up the situation in any country, all the way up to the point of social unrest.
Wow.
And that is the reason the Russians actually view cyber on par with nuclear weapons because of how they can be employed in destroying the country.
That's terrifying. I have to go back for a minute. You served in the intelligence community. You talk about this corrupt echelon of guys like Brennan and Clapper. What's their game? Why did they allow Putin to pull off this, to divide the country so badly? What are they up to?
Okay, so I think at first it was just simply, so we were not, like, as an institution, right? We were not paying attention to Russia because we were tied up with other things, Iraq, Afghanistan. We were chasing terrorists for 20 years.
Right.
Okay. And Gina Haspel herself, the former CIA director, admitted that they were just a couple of years ago trying to switch the focus to Russia. So at first, it was just inability to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? There were pockets in the intelligence community who were focused like a laser on Russia. And we were briefing, the Obama administration's officials. I personally briefed scores of people in the Pentagon and some of the national security staff in the Obama administration. And so the second reason is not just incompetence, but sort of naivete, right? Obama wanted to become to do a reset with Putin. Right. So they didn't believe that what Putin was up to, and he was actually planning this destabilizing strategy. And then closer to 2016, the corrupt echelons were so, focused on removing President Trump, the democratically elected leader, from office because they didn't like him. He wasn't part of the establishment, that they focused those resources on that and not focus on that. Instead of actually dealing with the Russian threat, they were busy, trying to manipulate intelligence and, focused on that Steele dossier and Pfizer, the whole fraudulent Pfizer applications right. to survey and all those things. So they had no bandwidth to actually focus on developing a strategy to counter the actual Russian threat. And now we're reaping the results of that strategic incompetence.
So they weren't actually working with Putin. They were just allowing Putin to do what he was trying to do in order to get at Donald Trump.
You mean the intelligence community working with Putin? Well,
I mean, it was just an accidental collaboration. They weren't trying to help him destroy America. They just wanted to use him to get rid of Donald Trump. Is that fair?
I would say that's very, very fair.
Okay.
Although now that you raise this topic, like you wonder, because remember the Brookings Institution and where Fiona Hill, came President Trump's advisor on Russia. And I used to respect Fiona highly, right? She's very competent on Russia. But then all of a sudden she became the key witness to in Trump's impeachment hearing. And then Igor Danchenko, who fed the information into Steele dossier, is basically connected to Russian intelligence. And the FBI knew that, okay? So now that you pose this question, I'm like sitting here scratching my head.
Well, I didn't mean to accuse them. I was just trying to understand what their motives are.
I got you. I got you, Andrew. You will be a good red team intel analyst, okay?
I appreciate it. I'll keep that in mind for a second career. Rebekah Koffler is the author of Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. Rebekah, that was really interesting. I really appreciate your coming on, and I hope to talk to you again.
Of course, this was very, very enjoyable for me as well. Thank you very much for having me, Andrew.
Thanks a lot, Rebekah. If you enjoy this content, like and subscribe to the Andrew Klavan Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.